What is this? Left-wing influencer downplays Cuba blackouts, worsening shortages, people are partying. Hassan Parker's trip to Cuba puts him at odds with the Trump administration framing of a severe energy collapse, hitting 11 million people. This is another hit piece. Hassan Parker, progressive media personality. There are rolling blackouts that take place throughout the day, all around the country, but today's a beautiful day out here. People are partying. People are partying in the streets. I don't know if it's an island mindset. Yeah, this is a testament to the Cuban population's resilience in spite of all of the circumstances that they have to exist in. Does not mean downplaying the blackouts at all. It's just a reflection of the reality on the ground. Piker, who supported self-declared progressives like Senator Bernie Sanders, New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani, praised the Cubans for their endurance. Wait, they also say it. Yeah. These people's resilience is remarkable. There are rolling blackouts that take place throughout the day, every day, all around the country, right? 11 million people. Parker's descriptions come as Cuba's communist regime finds itself choked off from access to energy imports after a U.S. operation in Venezuela, result in the capture of... It's very interesting that the title itself buries the lead. Like they do actually show my comments fully. I always find that very strange. According to the Department of State, Cuba began to experience energy shortages shortly afterwards. Understand that Cuba has largely survived on the basis of subsidies. The Maduro regime was providing them fuel, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a press event at the White House. So the reason why Cuba's electricity grid was already in collapse before Maduro was captured, it was already in collapse. The reason why things are as bad as they are is because they have an economic model that does not work. It's not functional. President Donald Trump has characterized the energy crisis as severe and said he believes public unrest has strengthened the U.S. influence over the island. I mean, they're openly saying the quiet part out loud. They're saying they're destabilizing the island by causing massive suffering, and including deaths, as a matter of fact. It's unbelievable. I do believe I'll be the honor of taking Cuba. That's a big honor. It's a very weakened nation right now. They were for a long time, Trump told reporters last week. Trump did not expand on what he meant by taking the island. Piker's characterizations, however, contrast sharply with the way the administration framed the on-the-ground circumstances on the island. A lot of the info that you see and hear on the island is like directly coming from, like, most of the time, National Endowment for Democracy Foundation-backed individuals, State Department propaganda, things like that, Piker said, referring to a pro-democracy group. It's very difficult to get information out of here, even though it's so close. They're just chilling. Cubans, they vibe. Piker did not respond to a request for a comment from Fox News Digital. You know what? They're only shooting themselves in the foot with all the coverage of your trip on Cuba, because before you went to Cuba, barely anyone was talking about what was happening, and now they won't shut up about it. Let us hope it opens the eyes of those unaware. One thing I will say about the Cuban situation is that for the last week, I didn't even know that this was happening initially, but for the last week, there was all this talk about, like, the hotels being the only thing that's powered, right? And it's a dichotomy that I addressed as well. It's something that I also saw and was horrified by. Tourism, unfortunately, is one of the most, like, anti-communist industries that you can engage in, and yet it's the only one that is a lifeline for the Cuban economy right now. But it's true. The reality is it's very difficult to create a communist system with simply just tourism. It just doesn't work that way, especially because people on the island are objectively infinitely poorer than the people that are coming into the island, right? Tourists that are coming into the island. The problem is, the only reason why tourism is the last remaining sector that brings in foreign capital in the island is because their exports and their imports are completely controlled by American sanctions, secondary sanctions on countries that dare work with Cuban producers. When they have nothing to trade as a direct consequence of America working tirelessly to make it impossible for Cuba to trade with other countries, the only thing they have remaining is tourism. It's the American design that makes it so that tourism is the only functioning sector on the island. And not only is it tourism that's functioning, it's tourism in the hands of private owners. Private owners that own these hotels that get special access allowed by the American government, because that's the level of control that America has over this island. Here's the Reuters Energy and Commodities article, exclusive. U.S. ramps up fuel exports to Cuba's private sector. So the American government is not only, on the one hand, starving the island, basically killing Cubans, right? It's also starving the island of engaging in regular commerce as any other country would, but it's also creating this weird double standard, this, like, very clear anti-socialist dichotomy. U.S. ramps up fuel exports to Cuba's private sector. As Ryan also says, Reuters confirms why I've been saying the U.S. has been allowing fuel into Cuban private businesses like foreign operated hotels, but barring it from hospitals and other publicly run institutions. I'm sure that the New York Times and the Free Press, which produced entire articles about Hassan Piker's hotel, will do a follow-up now. So not only did they force you into staying at these hotels, it's a very clever way to do propaganda, right? If you go to Cuba, you have to stay in these hotels. These hotels are the only places where there's power. Eventually, people that are living in rolling blackouts are going to look at that and go, what the fuck is this beacon? This is supposed to be a communist country. What the fuck do I think about communism if this beacon of capitalism is the only thing that has electricity on the island? Now, of course, the idea that like Cubans themselves despise the tourists is ridiculous. They do not. Like that I will oppose. They don't. They understand that like tourism is the only way that they can make money. Small businesses can make money. Regular Cubans can make money. Same with the cab drivers. Same with the artisans, the craftsmen that are selling their little goods. It's mostly people speaking for Cubans, right? But yeah, U.S. has shipped about 30,000 barrels so far this year. I believe the island needs around 100,000 barrels for its entirety. Fuel flows only to private sector under U.S. rules. Trump administration has strict blockade on oil supplies to the Cuban government. U.S. suppliers have shipped approximately 30,000 barrels of fuel to Cuba's private sector this year to date, according to documents and shipping data viewed by Reuters, suggesting a Trump administration plan to give private businesses a leg up over state-run enterprises is well underway. Since January, the United States has been enforcing a de facto oil blockade against its longtime foe in a bid to starve Cuba of fuel and pressure its government into submission. But it has made an exception for the communist-run country's small but vital private sector. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said authorizing those fuel exports fits with a broader Trump administration policy entirely designed to put the private sector and individual private Cubans not affiliated with the government, not affiliated with the military, in a privileged position. The volume of fuel imported since early February by the private sector, around 30,000 barrels or approximately 1.27 million gallons, is equivalent to just over 1/10 of a typical medium-sized fuel tanker's capacity, a fraction of the country's needs. Cuba had until recently required some 100,000 barrels per day of imported fuel to feed its power plants and meet regular demands from vehicles and jets. But the previously unreported figures suggest Rubio's plan is advancing, with imported volumes growing week by week, according to the shipping documents seen by Reuters. Container ships bring a variety of products. Since Washington captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro in January, the U.S. has blocked Venezuelan oil supplies to Cuba's government and threatened to slap tariffs on another country that ships fuel to the island. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel said last week the island has not received any fuel in 3 months. He made no reference to the private sector supplies. Thus far in 2026, 61 container ships carrying a variety of products imported by private companies, including fuel, have discharged in Cuba, often ferrying back and forth between Cuban and U.S., European, and other Caribbean ports. Most of the ships have discharged at the port of Mariel, west of Havana, and 2 more are underway from Spain and Jamaica to discharge by the end of the month, with arrivals down slightly from 75 container ships in the same period last year, according to vessel tracking data from LSEG analyzed by Reuters. According to the data, some of the Cuba-bound container ships departed this year from major energy hubs where products like coal, crude, and refined products are loaded, although the lion's share of the vessels that arrived in Cuba are categorized as origin as multi-purpose, which means they carry a variety of products. Why doesn't the government just seize those imports? Because they're in a tricky situation. If they were to seize those imports once, then no one on the island is going to get fuel. From their perspective, they can still, from what I understand, like the private businesses still pay taxes and revenue to the government, and then the government can circulate that cash to the population. And tourism being the last remaining sector that brings in foreign currency means that these hospitals unfortunately, America is starving the hospitals and only allowing fuel to go to the private businesses, hotels specifically. And it's a tricky situation. It's kind of like the black market that is formed in Cuba, right? There's a black market for the queue system that they have in Cuba right now. If you want to be able to get gas, you go to a state-run gas station. You get it super cheap. You get it for like $1 a liter, but then you sell it, which is not that cheap either. But you get it for $1 a liter and you sell it for $10 a liter right now. That's the going rate for a liter of gas in the island of Cuba. And the reason why it's $10 a liter is because there's a black market system. So Cubans will go on the internet and see, secondhand resellers of gas. And that comes up to $37.8 per gallon. It's unbelievable. It's nuts. I know. It's insane. So basically, the government is aware that there's a secondary market. The government is aware that there's a black market, but they can't even stamp out the black market as it stands because that's the only way that currency flows within the country. And from what I understand from the investigations that we conducted, the idea is that they only intervene if one singular person is making a good deal of money and rising above everybody else. But that implies that they're probably aware. I mean, they're definitely aware of this black market's existence, right? So the reason why they don't do anything about it is because it circulates cash and it's a lifeline for many families. It's unbelievable. They're so desperate that America is so successful at crippling the economy of this island that like a communist government is saying, all right, well, there's, a black market. As long as it's not a black market monopoly, we'll just keep it going. And then that fuel at $10 a liter gets in the hands of taxi cab drivers. They have like an Uber style system. They pay $10 a liter for their gas. They put it in their cars and they wait for tourists to come. When we were driving in the blackout in the night, a guy knocked on the window of the taxi that we were in and they had a conversation. And the guy said, I don't know what he said, but he said basically like, no. The guy that knocked on the window that was looking for a ride, and this is very commonplace, happens all the time in Cuba, people trying to hitchhike. The guy knocking on the window of the cab driver was a cop. He was sitting in the middle of the road in the dark, in pitch black darkness, and he needed to go from place to place. It was a cop that was asking for a ride. Like even the regular government functions are not working, right? I mean, it's crazy. And this is the insidious design. I call it bureaucratic terrorism. Not a single bullet is fired, not a single bomb is dropped on Cuba, and yet they terrorize Cuba all the same. And it has to be invisible, except Trump has made it visible, right? Trump has made it undeniable that he is responsible for this design, because that's just how Trump operates. That's just how Trump is. But up until Trump, we both openly would say that we were applying sanctions because the Cuban government is terrifying, but then also simultaneously claiming that the sanctions didn't exist at all. It's this weird double standard. But it has to be that way because that's how you justify the argument, because this is an ideological war. They don't want hospitals to be public. Not only do we not have public hospitals in the United States of America, with the exception of the VA, it's doublespeak, not double standard. You're right, sorry. But not only do we not have public hospitals here, we don't treat our citizens well, we're also forcing another country that has a public system to no longer have a public system. Tell us another story that never happened. Yeah, this is totally a not commonplace experience in Cuba. So funny that you think this is just like a made-up story. Why would I make up this story of all stories? Why wouldn't I make up like a cooler story if that was the case? Like, what of this story was so emotionally impactful for you that you, at first glance, immediately had to say, oh, it must be a lie? Why is it that this is the one that did it? We've been talking about hospitals experiencing blackouts, generators failing because they run out of oil. And this is the one story where you're like, definitely fake.